Welcome. This is our next interview in our Film Industry Insight series. And I'm so pleased to be talking to you, Elle McAlpine, intimacy coordinator extraordinaire and joint founder of EK Intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I well know, you've been in the world for a long time, both as an actor and now with intimacy. So, how did you start? Because you started off working with Ita O'Brien. How did you come to start working with her? Was there anything that happened to you as an actor that made you want to, delve into this world? Tell us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. I feel very honoured that you asked me to come and do this, and how nice to get to speak to you for some time. So yeah, I came into this work around 2016 when I was training at Drama Centre with Ita. She was one of my teachers. And it was coming to the end of my time there, and she was working with, we do our like end of year shows, and she was working with not my group but another group on a show called Katzelmacher, which is a German film that they'd made into a play that has a lot of intimacy and sex in it. And she worked with the cohort that were working on that play, and I remember watching it and being completely blown away by my colleagues and what they were able to access and how incredibly free they were in their bodies around the kind of intimate content that was in that play. And I know that they'd done a workshop with Ita, and I know that they'd really worked specifically on the moments of intimacy and how you kind of stage that to make it look realistic, and working with boundaries and consent. So that was when I first kind of heard about, I guess, working with intimacy in drama. And then off the back of that, Ita did a workshop for the Sunday. We did a workshop for the Sunday Times in, I think it was the September of 2017. So just as I was graduating, and we were working on a couple of scenes from a play called Cowboy Mouth. And I did this incredibly it was a full simulated sex scene. I did it with a colleague from drama school, so like a peer of mine. So there was already a level of comfort there. But I remember the workshop was amazing. We did a lot of animal work. We did a lot of like getting into our bodies and moving in the space and connecting to like parts of our bodies that we would use. So, a lot of connecting to our pelvis, to breath, to just, our bodies and how they move and work when engaged in kind of intimacy. And there was a photographer in the room for the Sunday Times magazine. And I remember thinking, oh God, this is quite strange, because it's meant to be this very private space. But hey, look, we're doing it for the Sunday Times. So a lot of the work, they weren't there. But when we were showing the kind of final pieces, the photographers and the journalists came in. And we were doing our scene, and it was, as they said, it was like a full simulated sex scene, and both come to climax. It was fully clothed, but we'd choreographed this thing with Miriam Lucia, who's also an intimacy coordinator. And I remember feeling like completely empowered and amazing. But as I was sort of arched, my back was arched, he was on top. I was like, my head and my neck was just like, I was like this, kind of coming to climax. And I remember the photographer literally coming, kneeling down and like snapping. And I thought, that is going on the fucking front cover. I know it will. I just know. And lo and behold, a month later, it was a double page spread of me like mid climax. I mean, you honestly, Sarah, you wouldn't recognize me. I looked like a completely different human being. But I remember coming away thinking, gosh, if you told me that was going to happen and that I would be in the Sunday Times magazine mid climax, obviously simulated, but as actors, you're so in it, it feels real. I would have said, no, fuck off. I'm not doing this. And actually looking at the image, I was blown away, one, by actually how realistic it looked, even though we were fully clothed, and the simulated action, doesn't read realistically when you're both fully clothed. But two, how kind of like, what's the word? I was just really proud of myself, but also it was so, the work that we did was so in character. It was so part of the description of the characters, the description of the scene. It felt so in keeping with the story and the characters that I didn't see myself looking at that. Weirdly, it was because of the work that we'd done on the character work, the kind of boundary setting, the choreography, like it was choreographed down to the nth, like thrust, that I felt so empowered and safe. And then I was just like, this is amazing. This is an amazing thing to have access to as an actor. It's amazing to have access to this sort of language, this way of working. Of course, a sex scene should be choreographed. And then, you look into the research and a lot of the a lot of what actors have come away from, a lot of what actors have said coming away from having done sex scenes in their career, and how uncomfortable it's made them feel, and how out of body they felt, and how they just wanted to get it over with. And so sort of marrying those two things, it was like, this is an amazing way to work on work on these sorts of scenes. And if writers, if directors, if showrunners want to implement sex into their storytelling, we need to interrogate why, and we need to choreograph it in a way that makes everybody feel safe, so that actually it looks more realistic, and you're not sat there as an audience member watching something and thinking, oh, that's really uncomfortable. Because I bet that discomfort is because the actors that are actually simulating that or emulating that physical score are uncomfortable if you're feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that was kind of where I started.
I love that you, and I think you said it a couple of times, I love that you said you felt empowered. I think that's so amazing. And I think it's quite terrifying that, intimacy coordinators and this, they haven't been around for long. No. It really is new. And then, like you said, thinking about loads of films, films that I would have watched in the past, with really, big sex scenes. And that there is that awkwardness. And then thinking back and thinking, God, those actors must have all felt a bit shit about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, so the future's bright for this, but that's also terrifying that, there's been so much work. So then did you start working with Ita before you set up EK Intimacy?
Yeah, so I did about maybe 18 months worth of workshops with Ita, so as an actor. So I was helping her show the work to the industry. So I did like hundreds of sex scenes in front of people as well. So not just in the privacy of, a closed set. It was in front of a lot of people. And so it was really working with like my own boundaries and what I felt comfortable doing, effectively live, like as people were coming to watch, because I felt really passionate about showing this work to an industry that can feel quite archaic, and that it's very difficult to break down some walls in this industry, and it can be really challenging. And it was a really eye-opening 18 months, because you felt the pushback, you felt the kind of like, oh, this feels too prescribed. You're taking away the director kind of role. You're becoming more of a director by helping with these scenes. And it's like, no, there's an inevitable power dynamic between actor and director. What we're doing is we're facilitating a safe space, a safe creative space for actors to kind of relay things that they might not want to relay to a director. They can relay it to you, and then you can kind of facilitate a space where you're aware of the actor's concerns, but also wanting to help the director with their vision. And so you're in this very privileged space where you can kind of hold these two and hopefully create something that sits within both camps. So you're honoring people's boundaries, but you're also honoring the vision of the director. But I felt as an actor and when I was showing the work to the industry, that it was my job to show them how fucking amazing sex scenes could be in this way, with this level of kind of intention and attention to a sex scene. So then after about, I think it was about a year of doing it as an actor, I was really kind of embodied in the practice of intimacy coordination, because I had a really strong felt sense of what it feels like. And then Ita turned around and was like, look, I am inundated with work. So this was post Sex Ed first series, and I think post Gentleman Jack's first series. And so the press were hot on it, because these shows had done so well, and there was a lot of amazing intimacy and sex in both those shows.
So she started to hear about it.
Finally starting to hear about it, absolutely. And then she was like, look, I need to train you up. So she trained 4 of us up. And yeah, I then went on to It's a Sin. That was my first big job. I'd worked on like a few short films and kind of interrogated my own practice on those short films and worked out, you know, my way of working, because it's amazing being taught by someone, but you really need to understand, okay, how do I take that teaching and integrate it into my own practice? So that was a great way to do that. And you know, I'm teaching now, I'm training intimacy coordinators, and the biggest thing for me is like, get that language in your mouth and see how it sits with you. Like, talk about cunnilingus, talk about fellatio, let's talk about female orgasm and like thrusting, and like just use that language and make it become colloquial to you, so you don't bring your own kind of shame and discomfort around, or judgment around, those sorts of things. And that was really important for me. I mean, I come from a family that have always talked about sex, so I've always been very comfortable talking about sex. It's never been something that has made me feel like uncomfortable. So it's quite interesting that I've come into this work, but it's so integral to kind of keep talking and keep kind of communicating this language in a very straight, direct way. And then It's a Sin happened, and we were so lucky because Peter Hoare is an amazing director, and he just gave us, me and David Thackeray were working on that, and it just gave us, they just gave us so much space to just do the work. And they were such advocates for us, and Russell T Davies was so supportive of us and gave us, again, the creative freedom to just try out, you know, because that series was about male sex and the joy of it. And we had such a clear brief. It was like, we want this to be light, we want this to be fun, because it's undercut by the AIDS epidemic, and we don't want it to sit like in that sort of harrowing energy all the time. We need the sex to elevate it and to make it something positive, because queer male sex is beautiful, and we want to see it. So we had such an amazing time on that show. And then I worked for Ita for about 2 years. And it's an interesting industry because it's, you know, we were all working for one person, but it's a very independent job. You never see each other on set. And it just felt right to to do our own thing.
Did you feel demand there?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting. I think when you're working in an industry where you're basically pioneering the role and you are the first intimacy coordinators out there, working under someone is difficult because they also don't know. They don't know. So you haven't really got like a mentor. You're all just working and trying to figure it out. Yeah. And just, you know, Ita was incredibly busy and didn't really have the time to mentor us to the degree that we needed to be mentored, because she was just, you know, inundated with work. So we needed to Kat and I felt anyway that we were each other's mentor. We were working it out together, and we wanted to create something ourselves, and we wanted to sort of see if we could build something, just the two of us. So that's where EK Intimacy was born.
I mean, you are now sort of creating the blueprint for the intimacy industry and everything, which I just think is phenomenal. And obviously, you know, I've been wanting to speak to you for ages, because the more people hear about it, and, you know, the more people understand that it's such an integral part of their production process. It's amazing. So you were talking about, you know, when we were doing the classes to the industry, how do you think the industry attitude has changed, obviously, since you started to now?
It's a bit like a domino effect. I think once you work with one director and I've had so much pushback, and I always just say to them, look, can you give me 5-10 minutes of your time, and I can try and show you to the best of my abilities how this work can actually enhance this scene rather than make it negative or deter from actually what it is that you're trying to do. I'm not here to try and take over your role. I'm here to try and navigate boundaries and consent with creative vision, and just give me 5 minutes and I will I'm sure I can I mean, I'm not in the business of trying to convince people. I'm like, the work speaks for itself. I don't need to convince you how important this work is. A lot of like the early years was just working with the actors. You just didn't have any chance with the directors. They didn't want They didn't really understand the role. They didn't really want you to enter their space. Not all directors, but a lot of them. So it was working behind the scenes with the actors, having conversations with them, making sure they felt heard, navigate, like just doing the quiet work where you're just in the background, making sure that everybody feels comfortable and safe, and letting then, when they get onto set, letting the director work it out. And if there's anything that it's almost like a puppeteer. It's like, there's anything that you see that is just, that you know is outside of an actor's boundaries, it's just a slight tweak and adjustment. What's happened now is that people are coming to us to help them create these scenes. And so you feel very much, it's so much more creative now, which I love, because initially it was all about safeguarding. It was all about just holding space for people's vulnerabilities. And, that can be quite challenging on your body and on your psyche if you're not then being creative with it. So I feel the shift has happened only really in the last, I'd say, well, actually since I did Poor Things, like only in that, and that was in 21. That's when I suddenly felt, because I'd been recommended for that job, I'd worked with a couple of actors who knew the people on that show, on that film, and so I'd stepped into an environment where they already kind of trusted me, and they already knew how I worked, and so I was given a lot of space. But again, this work is like anything in the creative industry. If you're given a good reputation, if you're given a good reference and have a good reputation, people are much more forgiving of you, and you are free to make mistakes, free to just be creatively kind of messy. Whereas I think initially I felt like I had to be really fucking good from the get-go. And now I'm more comfortable in not really knowing what we're going to do, and sitting more in the kind of, the messy middle of it all, so that you can, and that's what creative work is all about, like being comfortable in the discomfort and in the messy middle. So I hope that's clear.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, and this is something I want to speak to you about, the relationship on set. So obviously you've got the cinematographer, the DOP, you've got the director, you've got the actor. Where do you sit in all of that? Like, who are you engaging with? Are you talking to all of them? Is it different in every project?
Yeah, it kind of does depend on the project. Ideally, a lot of our work, a lot of the groundwork that we do is in prep effectively. So it's in those weeks when they're all prepping, and you're having conversations with producers, you're having conversations with actors, you're having conversations with the director, you're having conversations with the costume department, the makeup department, sometimes location, just because you could be on the side of a cliff having intimacy, having a sex scene. So you need to make sure that location has all of the equipment that they need to make it safe for the actors. We're talking to props sometimes because you're using prosthetics. You could be talking to the medical, like the medic on set. You're basically just setting yourself up to be working with everybody. And what I think we all noticed quite early on was actually there's not a huge amount of communication between departments. And so when we came in, we felt like a bit of the thread between, only in regards to intimacy, but suddenly everybody was communicating with each other in order to make this scene as good and to feel as prepared for these scenes as possible. So that's in the prep. It's very much connecting with every sort of head of department to make sure that on the day nothing goes wrong. Obviously you can't always control that, but we've always said, if we do our prep well, if we have done, we break scripts down, we look at what each scene requires, we have conversations with the directors about what their vision is for that scene. Some directors are amazing and have storyboarded every single scene, and so they already have a very, very, very strong vision about what they want for these intimate scenes. Sometimes directors work kind of day by day, so you have to kind of slowly coax them into having a conversation about the scenes, because this scene might be we might be starting in October and we might not be shooting this scene until February the year after. But in order for us to do our work, we kind of need a basic understanding of what kind of sex they're wanting in this show, what the tone is. Are we looking at like glamorized sex? Are we looking at raw? Are we looking at like raw intimacy? Are we looking at realistic intimacy? How are we portraying the sex in this show or in this film? Because it's a really important question to ask, because that can help with character work for actors. It helps us understand what we're kind of trying to create. So the more information that we can get at the beginning, the better. And then the fundamental work is just checking in with the actors, getting a sense of where their boundaries are, what their consent levels are, how they're feeling about the scenes. Again, it's really hard to ask actors, how do you feel about this scene that we're shooting in 4 months? But a lot of actors really want to engage in conversation about the intimacy, about the intimate side of their character, like what's the sexual expression of that character, how is it different when they're in the bedroom to when they are in their everyday life, like is there something that we can create in this scene that shows something entirely new, that makes an audience go, fuck, wow, that's amazing, or whatever, whatever it is. And creatives are creatives, like it's so fun talking about this sort of stuff. Some people don't want to talk about it at all, so you have to kind of navigate that, and they want to just do it on the day, and you're like, okay, that's fine. But for the most part, people give you a lot, and it's really inspiring. And then when you get on set, sometimes we'll have rehearsals. So sometimes we'll be lucky enough to have, a day of rehearsal, or we'll do like a workshop. So we'll workshop with the actors how we're going to work, what kind of exercises we'll do. We'll look at consent, we'll look at agreement of touch. Sometimes we have to do that in half an hour on the day before the scene's shot. So it does vary depending on production and the money that they have. And then on the day, hopefully, the reason that prep is so important is because you get on set, and it could be your first day on set, and at least you've had some sort of face-to-face communication with these people, because we're asking for them to trust us quite quickly. And so that level of trust needs to kind of be built in the prep. And then, depending on the director, you can, we'll always have a private rehearsal. So that will be with the director, the IC, and the cast. Sometimes the director will want the DOP in there just so that we can have a look at what angles we're shooting from.
Yeah, you've got to figure out all those intricacies as well.
Exactly. So, you could sculpt a really, really full simulated sex scene. And actually, because of the way that the DOP is shooting it, we might not have needed to have done that. So it's really a nice, it could just all be above the waist. So it's like, okay, so how do we create a score, a physical score, where we're just seeing above the waist? Because it's all very well like thrusting, but we need to show that in the top half of the body. So like you need to talk to the actors about what part of their body they're moving. Like, are they moving their chest more, so we get an idea of what is happening down below? And obviously it's all implied, it's all simulated, so there's an element of faking it the whole time. But it's really great if a DOP is involved, because they can kind of talk to you about angles, and that's why storyboards are great, because you have a general idea of how it's being shot.
You spoke earlier about prosthetics and about speaking to different departments. I would love to know what is in your bag. What is in an intimacy coordinator's like bag of life?
This is actually a really interesting question, because we're having a big discussion at the minute on Bec 2 on our union about whether intimacy coordinators should provide a kit. And a lot, it does sort of go into costume and like bleeds into what costume provide. But I think we have an understanding of the garments out there. We know how to use them. We know what works best. We only work on these scenes, so we have such an understanding of the stuff that works. So I have in my bag, we have a lot of little like Intermask, which is the company that kind of provides the best garments, is great, because they'll do a plethora of things. So you have things like it's called a Vegas thong, which is a thong for a male identifying person, for a man who has a penis and balls, so what effectively it's like a thong, but there's a silicone cover, so everything goes into the underwear, and then you've got this either a silicone covering to protect the genitals, or it can be like a much harder covering to protect the genitals if they're doing, like, let's say I don't know, there could be like a crotch grab. So you'll want something that's hard, that the other actor who is grabbing the crotch can kind of like really feel and not worry about touching somebody else's genitals. You have things called like modesty pouches, or a cock sock, which is just like a little bag effectively that, again, the man will put his genitals in, and then it will tape it. So that's if you're doing like a full implied nudity simulated sex scene, where it could be from the side or from behind, and we need to imply that he is fully nude. And so there'll just be like a pouch that sits and then is taped to the top of the pubic bone, or to the top of the like lower stomach, so it holds everything in place. And sometimes you have to kind of tape it all up so that it doesn't flap around when we're doing the action. You've then got things like a C-string for a woman, so it's like a hard C-string, so it kind of just sits at the top, and then it comes round and up, like sort of up the gluteal cleft, which is the bum crack, and it just sits at the top of the bum crack, and it will just hold everything in place. And again, it can either have a silicone or a harder one, depending on the level of comfort that the level of boundary that the actor wants. What we say when we're doing a simulated sex scene is there always has to be at least 2 barriers in between 2 bodies. Some coordinators make sure that there's always a 3rd barrier, so we'll put a cushion in between. But Kat and I work a lot with anchoring techniques, so sometimes there's just positions. If it's full implied nudity and full simulated sex, having a cushion in there is really difficult for the director and the DOP to like shoot around. So we use anchoring techniques as a way to sort of mask any modesty, and it means that you haven't got a cushion kind of lolling about the place. But we do provide cushions as well. So if you're doing a scene under the bed, you can have tracky bums on, you can have cushions in between bodies, and then you can just have maybe a bra, like a sort of a bandeau bra for the female, and it's all implied, so they look nude, but actually there's so much layering and cushions underneath. It's quite clever, really.
It's
and
amazing.
Then yeah, it's the tricks of the trade.
I know, and I'm just thinking about things that I've seen that I know have had intimacy coordinators, and I'm thinking about the different sex scenes, and I'm like, I want to go back and watch all these things now, sort of having spoken to you, and there's like a whole other level.
Yeah, and you'll sometimes like in most of the It's a Sin sex scenes, I'm like behind the bed, so I'm like there crouched down, just like ready with my robe to put on the actor, or like I'm in the cupboard in the room, and every time I see a scene, I'm like, well, I was in there, I was literally just in the cupboard whilst they have this intense sex. Yeah, there's so much.
So you're saying there's a debate at the moment as to whether you provide that or whether the film has it?
Yeah, so I mean, in the States, the intimacy coordinators and directors over there will always provide a kit bag. And it's sort of moving over to the UK. It's just part of a wider conversation about, do we provide a kit bag, or do we get, we always have we have long conversations with costume before, and we work out, okay, this is the level of intimacy, this is the level of nudity, we'll probably need this level of modesty, and we'll go through our breakdown form, and then they have the budget to get everything, so then they can provide that. But then arguably we know what works well, and sometimes costume have so much more, they have so much to organize that it's actually just helpful if we bring a modesty pouch, or we bring a Vegas thong, or whatever. Like I've got, I'll sort of update my kit every few months, but I will never assume that I will provide the kit. I'll always check in with costume and make sure, because they've been doing this job for years, and it's often fallen to the costume department to protect these actors. And so they are very well versed in this. And I think, for the most part, having spoken to the costume teams and the makeup teams, because they are, by default, a lot of them are female, and so they've always been assumed that they have to take on this sort of nurturing, safeguarding role, which is just ridiculous, because they don't have the training, and it's not a whole other job. It's a whole other job. And it's been, a lot of them are like, thank God you exist, because for years I've been having to navigate these really uncomfortable conversations with actors that don't want to talk to me about it because I'm the costume person, but also they build very close relationships with the actors. So I understand why it has fallen to them, but it's not in their job description, really. And it's not really fair on them either. But yeah, so it's always in conversation with costume, just to make sure, because they do know what they're doing. But if we can help in any way, then we'll obviously provide what we feel is best suited for the scene.
Yeah. So let's move on and talk about Poor Things.
Yes.
So you were talking earlier about, let's say there's a scene where you might need to use cushions, or you might need to use something. I haven't seen the film yet, obviously, but I've heard that there are sort of some quite big, like, orgy scenes. How does that work?
So there's a whole, she spends this whole time of her life in a brothel. And it's like, it was amazing because we had, I think it was about 3 weeks working on all these scenes. There were so many of them. I don't think we had an orgy as such, but it's this like, it's this sort of like punter after punter after punter coming in and having sex with her.
Right.
But just to talk about orgy, so there was an orgy on Brave New World, I don't know if you saw that, where we worked with, I think it was like 120 dancers, all having simulated sex. And it's really helpful working with dancers because they're so in their bodies and they're so used to kind of working with each other in wearing not very much. But again, we had to go through the same kind of protocols, making sure that everybody felt safe, everybody felt comfortable. So what we did with that was that we were working with a choreographer, because it was this sort of like dance movement, and then they all kind of fall to the floor and then they all start having sex. And so with orgies, you need more than one intimacy coordinator, because with that it was 60 dancers, and then there was another 60 supporting artists. So we each had a group, and we each helped with help of the choreographer. I mean, they helped us get into the positions, and then we looked at the simulated action that was happening between 3 people as such. So you're rehearsing in full rehearsal clothes, so you're in trackies or leotards or whatever, and you're working out within each group like what kind of sex that what kind of sex they're having. And then when you get to set, we're always saying to people, just remember, you're going to be fully, it's full implied nudity. So you're only going to be wearing very limited. So just have that in mind when we're sculpting and choreographing this scene, like what you'll feel comfortable with when you are in full implied nudity. But it was amazing working on that. And then you kind of, they all stripped off, and it was just incredible. But because you've given, we worked really hard to kind of give them these characters, why they were doing this, how it serves the story. And Brave New World is a novel, and so we really talked to them about reading it and really getting a sense of what these humans are doing and why they're doing this. And this sort of like pleasure garden, that's what it was called. Like, we're in this pleasure garden. Sex is not, we have such limited, I think, knowledge as a society now about eros and about kind of sex and liberation, and the way in which we express ourselves through sex. I think we've been so shut down from that energy as a culture. And I think it's so empowering when you read things that are so like such a liberating stance on sex and on like just and that was a particular job where it was like, let's just look at this, like these people are just having sex for the pleasure of it, like it's just an expression of who they are, and they want to feel pleasure constantly, and they're so immersed in each other's bodies, and it's such a beautiful thing. And so that was really fun. So that's how you kind of approach an orgy. With Poor Things, we were working, Emma was working with a lot of supporting artists, so a lot of my work was working very closely with them, because I think initially there wasn't a huge, they were like, oh, why do we need an intimacy coordinator? I think the production felt that from the start. I mean, they'd said it in the press. I think Emma said, she's like, I didn't really feel like I needed an intimacy coordinator. And I remember saying to her, I was like, you're having a lot of intimate relations, your character's having a lot of intimate relations with men that she doesn't know. And by default, there are a lot of supporting artists coming in. Like, my work can be to help them, because they are also coming into a space where there is a huge power dynamic situation going on, where you've got a very famous actor, you've got a very famous director, you've got a very famous DOP. Like, there's a huge level of pressure that these supporting artists are going to feel coming into a room like that. So let me just do my work to give them a space where they can feel safe, and let me be in the space, and they know that I'm that person that they can come to if they're feeling uncomfortable, so they don't have to bother the director. And so that's kind of how I sold myself to that production. I was like, they will need me, you might not, they will.
That's amazing though, and talking about that power dynamic as well. I never would have thought of that, but it makes so much sense now.
And I think once you say that, they're human beings at the end of the day. She was like, of course, that makes total
and everyone's
sense.
like, of course they understand that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And these supporting artists were phenomenal. I mean, they were absolutely, I never think there's enough credit given to, because I mean, some of them were actors, but a lot of them weren't. And they're coming in just to do a sex scene. And a lot of them are like in full implied nudity, wearing not very much. And they are sublime. Like Yorgos cast some incredible performers. I just think they were amazing. But yeah, it's navigating how you do that with people who have sometimes never even performed before, and they're doing, they're doing a full sex scene with a famous movie star, but they were all so professional, and she was amazing. She just was such a professional, and so so kind of so what's the word I'm looking for? Like receptive to the role.
I was about to say, did she open up to you? Because you said initially, and I have read that as well, she's like, oh, I didn't think I'd need one. I was happy, I was confident. Obviously, her and Yorgos have worked together in quite a few films. So did you find she opened up to your role a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, she's such a wonderful human being. She never made me feel like she felt that at all. And she was like, look, I have a really great relationship with him. I'm never going to do anything that I don't feel comfortable doing. Like, that's just a given. I'm, she's empowered. She's an empowered human. She's like, I am not going to say yes to something I don't want to do. And he's not going to ask me to do something I don't want to do. Like, we've got a really solid thing going on here. And so, as an IC who is, they don't know you from Adam. They're like, well, who is this girl? I was like, do you know what? Full respect for that. That's absolutely fine. But I will just continue to do my work. And if it gets too much, you just say, look, thanks so much, but I don't need you to check in with me or whatever. Like, I was really transparent with her. I was like, just let me know. We're working together for a long period of time. Just, I'd sort of send her messages and just to check in, because it's really vulnerable, and it's really hard work as well, physically on your body, like doing sex scene after sex scene after sex scene. Like, there's a lot to do physically, and you get to the end of the day sometimes and you just think, fuck, what have I done today? Sometimes I remember being on the tube after doing that orgy scene in Battersea Park, and I was like, people are just coming back from work, and I've just done this wild thing in the park with all these amazing performers, but like, I work in sex, so your day is very, it's just so out of like most people's imagination.
But this is what we need. It's like you said, we're living in this unfortunate age where it's like, don't talk about sex. Let's not mention anything. Let's not say cunnilingus. Let's not talk about a penis or a vagina. And you need to be sitting there and you need to tell that guy next to you what you've just been doing all day. I wish there was more of that.
Think about this role, though. You tell people, in the pub or whatever at a party, like, what do you do? And I'm an actor first and foremost, and so I'm like, I wish I was acting. But people are like, oh, that's great. What have I seen you in? And that's just the worst question. So you're like, I'm an intimacy coordinator. And then they're curious. They're like, you're what? And then you start some really fascinating conversations about sex, and people start to open up to you about things. And yeah, I think it's such a taboo subject, and yet we all do it. It's so part of our life. It's such a, we have orgasms for a reason. Like, it's pleasurable, it's great. There's also so much shame and so much, just so much taboo around it. And talking about it and being open about it is another thing.
Yeah, God forbid. And I think as well, it doesn't help that we're British. It makes it 1,000 times worse. I've got another question here that I wanted to ask you. So, EK Intimacy, you worked with Molly Manning Walker.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was her good thanks you?
Yes.
So obviously director's notes here, we, curate mainly short films, and there can be obviously a lot of budget constraints, or you've got teams that have worked together for a long time, so they feel comfortable. What's the world like with shorts for intimacy coordination? Do you find they're more open? Do you find it's more challenging? Because, sex scenes, they need them.
Short films are our playground, because if we're lucky enough to be asked to do it, I mean, sometimes they don't have the budget, and so there's a big conversation there about whether they need intimacy coordinators. But I think for the most part, like short films that aren't student films, short films have a budget, and they should, if they've got a sex scene in it, they should budget for an intimacy coordinator, because it's really important. You're basically start saying to the industry, like, it starts at the beginning. It starts when people are just starting out, are creating their own content. Like, they wouldn't do a fight scene without a stunt coordinator, so why are they doing a sex scene without intimacy coordinator? But when they do, you are given so much creative freedom. It's incredible. Like, you're just given space to interrogate your own practice and work out, where your anchoring techniques aren't quite working, and so you work it out on those shoots, and then you get to the bigger shoots and you have confidence in your work, and you can take that to multi-million pound production companies where they've got so much money and there's loads of famous people, and you're having to navigate that whole dynamic. So short films for me are like where it's at, really, because it's so much more fun, and everybody's not quite got the egos yet, or I mean, I shouldn't say. Do you know what I mean?
Like, that's fair. I don't think anyone would argue with you there.
No, and you're mucking in effectively. Everyone's trying to work out how to do this with limited time, limited budgets, and you can just do whatever needs to be done in the moment. And you build these wonderful relationships with these up and coming directors or up and coming DOPs, and it's a great place to build your network and to play.
Yeah. So I saw on your website as well, you guys have got a podcast coming.
We do.
I was so excited. I went onto my podcast thing and I was like, I don't think it's not there yet.
I mean,
what's that going to be about? What are you guys talking about?
I love that you've asked me this question. Kat and I, this is like 2 years in the making.
Well, you've had a baby in the meantime. You're allowed bedtime.
Our idea for it was that everybody that we talked to about this work gets so fascinated by it, so curious about it. Like, dads of friends of mine will engage with me in a conversation about it, and like they're so into it and they want to know everything. And Kat and I talk for hours on end still about the work and our process and how we're kind of like constantly evolving. And so the idea was to talk to directors, to talk to actors, to talk to other ICs, to talk to each other about sex and about our responsibility as an industry now. That the porn industry is worth billions, and the sex in which they are showing, like, human beings want to watch sex. Like, just look at how many people log onto Pornhub, have accounts on a plethora of websites where they watch porn for free. And I think as an entertainment industry, we have a responsibility to look at the sex scenes that we're creating and ask, like, how can we use these sex scenes as a way to educate our young people, as a way to look at romantic relationships, as a way to just look at relationships in general, like, and look at intimacy. And we're so cut off from it, and that is only perpetuated by the porn industry, because it's faceless, it's vacuous, it's often non-consensual, it's rough, it's like, it's an industry that needs tweaking in its own. We've worked with a lot of adult performers, and they say it would be so helpful to have intimacy coordinators in the porn industry. And there are some amazing intimacy coordinators out there working in the porn industry and trying to make that environment more consensual, more boundary informed, more like, just more, but kinder. But for the most, we work in simulated sex, and we have a duty of care to our audiences, and also to our young people who are watching these shows, to just show them what sex can be like, and like the realities of it. Glamorized sex is amazing and it has its place, and you just sometimes want to watch like the most perfect sex or the most perfect relationship, and
but
the most perfect.
I don't believe that on screen. I'm like, that's not how it works. That's never what it looks like. When the woman orgasms in 30 seconds. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, well done, thank you.
Well, exactly. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so, it's about taking our time with these scenes. And so anyway, the point of the podcast would be to like talk about that, to talk about the sex scenes that we've worked on, to just engage people, I think, in talking more openly about sex. I mean, there's so many sex podcasts out there and people doing amazing things. So we're just still fine tuning like what we can bring to the space. And if there's even any legs to it at the minute. But we've recorded a couple of episodes, so yeah, it's just now about seeing if it flies.
So my final question for you, what's next? What are you working on now? What does the future look like?
Well, I've sort of tentatively, I went back to work tentatively in June. I worked on an amazing show called Such Brave Girls, which is coming out, I think, in November, which is written by Kat Sadler, who is just phenomenal. And so that was great. That is gonna, yeah, that was a challenging job in and of itself because of the nature of the scenes and what kind of sex we were showing. Anyway, it was great. So that I did that in June. I'm working on a show called Gen Z at the minute, which is directed by Ben Wheatley, who is an English film director, about zombies and Gen Z. It's great. It's hilarious. I just did some zombie sex the other week. So yeah, there's that. And what else? There's a couple of things coming out. There's a film that I'm meant to be working on, but it's not. I was meant to be doing it last year, if not the year before, last year, called The Governesses, which is an amazing story that has a book of the same name, I think, that's shooting in Barcelona. So might be doing that. Haven't had the green light for it yet, but we'll see.
I think sort of, the end question is, and this is what I want to know is, do you see that people want ICs and there's a need for you?
I think so. I think I don't see how working with consent, working with boundaries, facilitating a space where people feel creatively safe is not something that people should want. I do understand where directors have come from, where if they've had great practice, they sometimes say, but I've been doing this and I do this the way that you do it. And it's like, I appreciate that. And I am not here to tell you that you've been doing it wrong. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you don't have time. You have this whole show or this whole film where you've got 1,000 a million moving parts. You can't focus. You can't spend an hour with your actor talking about their consent levels and their boundaries and picking. I mean, it's just not realistic. And also, you are the director. Your actor wants to please you just by the nature of the director actor role. Like, there is a power dynamic at play here. Whether you have a good relationship or not is actually beside the point. Like, you need a third party to come in and just to create a more balanced space. And even if it's a bit like the stunt coordinator. 30 years ago, people were like, we don't need stunt coordinators. And I think sometimes it's a good way of convincing people by saying we are like a stunt coordinator for sex scenes, but the roles are so different. It's actually not, they're not the same at all. There's just an element of safety required in both of them. There's an emotional and physical risk when you're doing intimate scenes, and we're hopefully there to try and mitigate those risks and just to put best practice into place. And I think producers, and especially having press that Yorgos, what Yorgos said was amazing, because we've got a straight cisgendered white man who is like a genius in the field saying something positive about this work. And I think that's huge, because it's not huge because it's me, but it's huge by just the fact that somebody like him, if he hopefully feels that this is important, it will just bleed out and it will make it easier
for the entire industry.
Yeah, exactly.
And that will. I think it'll have a brilliant positive ripple effect.
Yeah.
Which I'm so excited for you for, because you deserve it and I want to see more of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, this industry there's so many amazing people working within it, and there's so many amazing people doing so like phenomenal work. And I just think it's exciting for everybody. And, each intimacy coordinator goes onto set every day, trying to make the world a better place and trying to impact shows and make a change and affect change. And, we're just all trying to do our best, aren't we, really?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Elle. This has been fabulous.
My pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for having me.